My presentation will definitely be less long than Calvin's. I hope you guys still have some energy to pay attention. While we wait for the slides.
Isn't this slide?
Yeah. This works? Cool. Does the mic work? Yes. I'll try to sit down. So this presentation is actually taken from a very technical presentation. I tried to make it a little bit more accessible for this audience. So if there's questions, feel free to ask. I might accidentally skip over some things that you might want to know. The whole technical presentation is in the end, so if you have questions, we can go there if you have time for that. So ARC is a new idea for a layer 2 protocol. Currently, the main layer 2 protocol that people talk about is the Lightning Network. I have a short slide about problems with the Lightning Network. I just want to first of all point out ARC doesn't exist yet. It's not a product that you can use. There's no app. There's nothing. It's just ideas, but also people enthusiastic about the ideas and people that are working on trying to make those ideas into a product. But I say this because there's no how does this work in ARC, because there's still many different versions of all the different solutions and aspects of this protocol. So who am I? I'm Steven Roose. I've been a Bitcoin developer for quite a long time. I used to work at Blockstream in the Liquid team. I'm currently on sabbatical, so I'm technically still at Blockstream. And I also work on Rust Bitcoin, which is actually the library that both BDK and so Evan and Alekos also use. So the Lightning Network, right? So currently, when you want to make Bitcoin payments, you either have to pay a lot of money to all the miners or you use a Lightning Network. But the Lightning Network, even though it has very good properties, it has very fast and very private payments, it also comes with some drawbacks. So the Lightning Network works as a channel network. So in the Lightning Network, when you talk about the Lightning Network, it's actually a network of all kinds of computers, and they form channels between individual pairs of computers or of people. And when you make a payment, the payment actually goes over a series of these channels. So if you, for example, have a network like this, all the lines are channels, then any node can pay the other node by following the lines, right? So, but these lines actually represent an on-chain transaction and a number of Bitcoin that actually exist in the UTXO set. So in order to receive or send Lightning, you actually need to have one or more of these channels. If you have a ball here, you cannot reach anyone, right? So if you have a ball here, you would have to add some lines to some of the other people so that you can start making payments. So the main problem, there's various problems with the Lightning Network, but the main problem, as from a user experience perspective right now, is that you need to have something on chain so that you can receive and send Lightning payments. And if you want to send Lightning payments, you can easily overcome this problem by just putting some of your money in a channel, and then you can send over the channel to other people. But if you want to receive payments, this is a lot harder, because then you need to convince someone else on the network to make a channel with you with their money so that you can then receive that money over the channel. So that's currently the main UX problem in the Lightning Network. It's called the inbound liquidity problem. And this is something that the ARC layer 2 solution doesn't have, and it's its main competitive advantage with the Lightning Network. So what is ARC? It's an alternative layer 2 solution, but it's actually interoperable with Lightning. So you can make Lightning payments over ARC, and you can receive Lightning payments over ARC. So like I just said, competitive advantage is not really competitor of Lightning. It's just trying to give better user experience to people that can easily use Lightning. So as a model, it's not based on channels. So it's entirely different conceptually, technically than Lightning. So it's based on having UTXOs that exist in the Bitcoin blockchain being shared by an arbitrary number of users. And then this share of this UTXO, we will call a virtual UTXO. So instead of having your UTXOs that you have created on the blockchain and have paid fees for them to exist, and then when you want to spend them, you need to actually spend them and then pay fees to create new ones, you actually create virtual shares of these, and then everyone who's doing this together kind of shares the costs to make those on-chain transactions. So Arc is a protocol for like exchanging these like shares. It's called virtual UTXOs for new virtual UTXOs in like a trustless and atomic way. So without going too much into details, so for example, above the line is like an on-chain transaction that has occurred at some point, and it has like an output with 4 Bitcoin, right? But this 4 Bitcoin, it doesn't belong to an individual. It doesn't belong to like we talked about, like a single key or like a multi-sig key. Like there's no one who can like actually spend or take this 4 Bitcoin. But there's some protocol based on like some of the fancy technical features of Bitcoin, where there's like a number of people, let's say in this case, like Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave, that each have the right, or that each own like a share of 1 Bitcoin of this 4 Bitcoin. And the Arc protocol allows any of these people to actually take their 1 Bitcoin if they want to, without needing any agreement from any of the other people. So while on the chain there only exists 1 coin that has 4 Bitcoin, Alice, Bob, Carol, and Dave each know in their like software, in their wallet, that they actually have 1 Bitcoin, and they don't need anyone else's permissions to get this 1 Bitcoin. And then like this is fancy because we can have like one thing on the chain, and like many people, like this could be like thousands of people, and they can all own like a piece of coin. But then if you own the coin, you also need to spend the coin. So this, like, just to say, like, this protocol way to unlock your 1 Bitcoin is what we call a virtual UTXO. But then, like, if you have a VTXO, like, if you want to do something with this, you need to spend VTXOs, right? So what Arc does is a protocol where you can have one of those VTXOs and then atomically somehow eliminate your ownership of them and get in return different VTXOs in like a whole different on-chain route payment, so to say, right? So the model is very similar to how Bitcoin transactions work, that you have inputs and outputs. But instead of being like actual Bitcoin transactions with actual UTXOs and then like input UTXOs and output UTXOs, you have like this virtual TXOs, and there's like, it's between quotes because it doesn't really exist. It's not really a Bitcoin transaction, but it's the same model where you have inputs and you have outputs. So you can treat them in more or less the same way. So how the intrinsics work of making this atomic, I'm not going into too much, but we can talk about that later if people have questions. So then, like, what is like an Arc, or what is Arc? Arc is a protocol that works in rounds. So if you enter an Arc, there can be multiple Arcs. We got into that a little bit later. There will be a coordinator of the round, and every of the Arc, and the Arc will have rounds. So in each round, everyone who is part of the Arc can just spend their VTXOs and create new VTXOs in an atomic way. And every round results in a single payment being made to the Bitcoin network, like one of those payments that we saw before. It's a transaction that has an output, and this output is basically shared with everyone who participated in this round. So no matter how many people actually participate in the round, or no matter how many transactions happen in the Arc, every round there's going to be a single payment on the chain, a single transaction on the chain. And these rounds are coordinated by a centralized party called the Arc service provider, and the service provider coordinates the rounds, and it provides liquidity for the transactions in the round. The liquidity is a little bit tricky, so I'm not going too deep into that. We can talk about it if people are interested, but it's very important to know that the service provider is just a coordinator, and the service provider, it's not a custodial. So all the users of the Arc can at any point of time get their money back without needing cooperation from the service provider or any of the other users in the Arc. So that's why it's a trustless second layer protocol and not just a custodial, but it is centralized in the way that a single service provider coordinates an entire Arc. There can, of course, be different Arcs and different service providers, but your payments happen always inside the Arc, even though you can, of course, like use Lightning payments and send payments from one Arc to another, but like your interactions with Arc will always be within like the same Arc within a single service provider. So what does this give us? It basically gives us like UTXO style of chain payments, in the way that like Lightning payments work very differently. Lightning payments don't have the UTXO model. Like you basically ask a node to make a payment, and then you have to set up all these things. While an Arc transaction works a lot conceptually like a Bitcoin payment. Like you have like your different VTXOs instead of UTXOs, and you combine them to like get enough value, and then you can make outputs. So you can do almost any kind of like more fancy smart contracting stuff that you can do on Bitcoin, you can also do on Arc because you have actual outputs. So you can put in these outputs, you can put scripts to, for example, do things like market making, like betting, like DLCs, if people know the name. Because you have actual UTXOs, they are just like virtual and off-chain. The protocol is also a lot simpler than Lightning because your only interactions are between you and the Arc service provider. And I think this is very significant because Bitcoin, you can just receive a little bit as if it was custodial. So this is the main benefit of Arc. The main drawback then is that the VTXOs in Arc, unlike UTXOs, they don't live forever. So a UTXO in Bitcoin, like you can have it, you can go to sleep for like 20 years and the UTXO will still be there. If you have your key written on a piece of paper or in a piece of metal, you can get your coins. A VTXO has an expiry. The expiry is like dynamic, the ASP can choose. People are talking about expiries of like 2 weeks or 1 month. So this means that your software needs to come online at least once every 2 weeks, like your wallet or like your phone wallet or whatever, because when the VTXO expires, you need to like cycle it and refresh it for a new VTXO, and then you can wait another 2 weeks or 1 month or something like that. So this is the main drawback. So you need to have still some piece of software that regularly can connect with the ASP to like make sure you don't lose your money. Like if you would not come online, that's like discussion we can have. If you don't come online, technically the money can be like stolen by the ASP, but we envision that like many of these ASPs will like want to be a good service provider, so people use them, so they might actually like just like cycle them for you and have a service that works a little bit like that. But like, yeah, if you want to use it trustlessly, you need to come online every expiry time of like 2 or, yeah.
Is it the to read something like watchtower results?
Yeah, so yeah, I understand what you mean. Like there's well, we've been talking about this a lot. Ideally, we think that there would be some kind of watchtower design where people are actually watching the ASP and making sure that the ASP actually recycles all the VTXOs before they expire. And yeah.
And there is no way to prevent that, which we can just warn you that the ASP is VTX, so it makes this.
Yeah, so the question with all these watchtower things is like, can you prove that the UTXO, that the ASP did something bad, right? So I think for expiry specifically, there's other problems where we want to use watchtowers. For expiry, I think it's fairly easy. I think the ASP can just publish every round from the expired round from 2 weeks ago, say like, hey, these are all the VTXOs and I didn't take any of them because these are all the new VTXOs that were created from them. So basically, this is a fairly easy problem to solve if the ASP is like a nice guy and wants to say, hey, I will promise that I will recycle your VTXOs if you don't come online, and I will prove that I did it. That means that worst case, you can lose them, but then everyone will know, and then maybe no one will use the ASP anymore, and they will start using another ASP, right? So yeah, this is something that might be solvable with some game theory. But even worst case, like your phone is online all the time, right? You don't have to run like gigabytes of data. You just need to be online and like interface a little bit with the ASP and just, so it's fairly easy. Like there's no computer resources requirement for like an Arc client. So I said that Arc is compatible with Lightning. So I want to talk about that a little bit. So you can actually make Lightning payments directly from Arc. So you can make a transaction in Arc and then that will be like as if it was made in a channel, and then you can actually forward that payment in the ARC over the Lightning Network to any node in the Lightning Network. And so from an ARC user's perspective, it's kind of similar to doing an ARC payment. And how you do this is that there needs to be some node in the ARC. We usually think it will be the ASP because it's the easiest, that will be responsible for forwarding your payment on the Lightning Network. So basically, the ARC service provider can also be a Lightning service provider, where you make an ARC payment to the ASP, and then the ASP forwards it on the Lightning Network. And it has the same trust model as Lightning. So like the ASP cannot really cheat you. So the ASP will then be responsible for like handling all the Lightning payments. Technically, it doesn't have to be the ASP. It can be any person who's part of the ARC can provide the LSP service. But it's just going to be way easier because you're already talking with the ASP all the time. Like your interface is always with the ASP. That is just easier that the ASP just does the same. But like technically, there can be like a competitive market where some other party says like, hey, we also want to be a Lightning service provider on this ARC, and we offer a lower fee. Then maybe you can use the different LSP. That's why there's an asterisk. Alternatively, if you don't want to like make Lightning payments in the ARC, ARC could also be used as a way to make Lightning channels, but not having to broadcast your channels to the whole network. So like I said before, if you want to be part of the Lightning Network, you need to have a channel with some other people. And these channels are generally represented as an actual UTXO that has been confirmed on the blockchain and which costs you like fees. But instead of that, you could also have a UTXO or a VTXO that actually represents the channel. And then you can also be part of the regular Lightning Network. And instead of like using this UTXO over your channel, you use a VTXO. This means that, so the term for this is usually termed like a channel factory. So basically in the ARC, you can like create many channels. And the only downside of this is that like your channels will obviously expire like the VTXOs. But since they're so cheap, you can just like get a new channel every 2 weeks. And since Lightning is already an always online protocol, this is not a problem for Lightning at all. Like the Lightning, like your Lightning peers can just like recycle your channel every time the VTXO expires. So one last thing I kind of want to touch on, because ARC is often termed as like a privacy solution as well. Like the way I described ARC until now is basically the ARC service provider knows everything. Because all the transactions, like you talk with the service provider and say, hey, I want to make this transaction. And the service provider says, okay, we can do that. So that's kind of bad because like the service provider can like gobble up a lot of data. It's like the Facebook problem or the Google problem. They know everything. So ideally, we don't want that. So there's a solution for this. We don't want the ASP to have full insight. So the solution is that actually every ARC round can be like a blinded coin join round. So this is like a technical term. That means that all the transactions inside and around can actually be made anonymous from each other. So that like you can just like what the world and what the ASP can see is just all the payments, all the inputs that go into a single round and everything that comes out of a single round. And they don't really know like, oh, who was sending what to what, right? There's already some products that do this, but with Bitcoin UTXOs, with like actual UTXOs, there's like blinded coin join mixing, for example, Wabi Sabi. But the benefit with doing this with ARC is that you don't actually need to make all these UTXOs. Like you can do Wabi Sabi and like make a big coin join round to mix your UTXOs, but like you make these really big transactions and you need to like constantly make on-chain payments just to mix your coins, not even making payments to people. But in the ARC, it's like there's no extra cost because you're already like meshing all this thing inside ARC, and the result is just one on-chain payment, one on-chain transaction. So if you do this like coin join round also in the ARC, you don't have any extra costs. So this way, your anonymity set for your payments is like everyone in the ARC, right? So there's an advantage to having big ARCs. So this was basically what I had today. The full technical explanation can be found here. And if you have questions, we can talk a little bit more about the technicals. There's a website that the inventor of the protocol called Burak made. Personally, I don't like it too much. It's very confusing. And like I said, like there's many different conceptual versions of Arc right now, because people are like discussing, this could be better than that, this could work this way. So this is like one version. The technical explanation is kind of a slightly different version. But yeah, at some point there will be some Arc that exists, and then like we can talk from there. So other questions? Whoever.
You take go ahead.
Yeah, I have a.
So you can.
Okay.
How about the?
What's the equality for build is there a people that like I
Yeah.
there is it something like the kids are speaking the kids and the other kids like on the other side because they have ESP?
Yeah. So there's two main costs, right? So like I said, every round broadcasts one transaction. So the cost for that transaction will obviously have to be shared among all the people making transaction, because otherwise the Arc service provider will just be like a benevolent like donator. So that cost obviously needs to be shared. And the second one is a liquidity cost. So whenever you make a payment, it's not trivial to explain how much liquidity is like needed, but there's in some situations there's some liquidity costs. So the ASP will have to provide this liquidity, and they will also like want to like cover this cost, right? So probably there will be some kind of cost, like how much a Bitcoin day is worth. You can already do calculations like this based on like Lightning or like other investment things. So there's a liquidity cost and the on-chain cost. And then probably the ASP for doing the work will like charge some fee on top, but you pay the fee whenever you make a transaction, right? So yeah, ideally we'd end up with like 5 ASPs, so that there's like some way to like push their prices down because they can compete with each other. If there would be a single ASP, it could be kind of shitty because they could kind of like have a monopoly and increase the fees. But inherently, like the arcs are not walled gardens. Like you can easily make a transaction from one arc to another using Lightning. So it's not like you get a lot of benefit when your counterparty is in the same arc. So that's already good, right? It means that you can have a small arc and not have like a downside, right? If you're on a small social network right now that's walled garden, you cannot talk with any of the others. So it's like stupid. You always go to like WhatsApp or like Instagram, right? But that's not the case with Arc. So it gives me like hope that there might be like several service providers.
Daily.
You had many questions?
Oh yeah, I just want to make sure I didn't hear you incorrectly just now. Was that cross ASP payment is possible on your VTXO or lots of ASP?
Yeah, so your VTXO is locked in your ASP, but since Lightning is like a native part of Arc, you can just Lightning from one Arc to the other, right? So you can just tell when you tell your ASP you want to make a Lightning payment, the ASP doesn't know where it's going. So then one person in one Arc can just like receive using Lightning, one person in another Arc can send using Lightning, and it just hops over without the ASP even knowing that what's happening.
VTXO's locked to that ASP.
Yeah.
Like what if that ASP disappears?
Yeah, but that's another problem. If it disappears, you can't do anything, right?
But are you gonna somehow be able to receive your funds back on the chain?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's like that's where I'm wrong.
Yeah, that's where the unilateral exit. Yeah, I didn't mention that word, but like I said, everyone has a way to like without any cooperation from anyone get their money back. We call that like a unilateral exit. Like you can unilaterally without anyone else's permission just exit the protocol. The main problem Arc has right now is that exiting the protocol costs on-chain fees. So if you want to exit alone, the fee will be significant, at least when on-chain fees are high. But yeah, we expect that secondly, it's always like this like chicken and egg. Like we expect off-chain protocols will be more popular when fees are high. So when fees are high, off-chain protocols also like have more difficulties. So yeah. There's like, I can go a little bit into detail. There's two reasons why you want to unilateral exit. And in one of the cases, the cost will probably be fine. In the other, not. So one of the cases is the ASP just disappears. Either it like crashes and it loses its server or something, or it's like malicious and it says like we go to the Bahamas. Like the ASP can just like totally disappear. But in that case, everyone needs to exit. And it will be like really slow. Like we have like numbers and statistics for like how long it will take for all these VTXOs to go on chain. But the good thing about this is it's like a tree, right? So you want your one leaf in the tree. And if you're alone, you need to like broadcast a lot of nodes in the tree. But if like you're like everyone, and you have like only like $10, but the guy next to you is like $10,000 in its VTXO, like he will have a bigger incentive to pay for the first and then for the second and then for the third. So like basically the cost of the higher nodes in the tree, like the cost of all the nodes is basically shared over everyone. So someone who have more money at stake will like be more willing to pay others to pay the fees. So if you have less money at stake, you can just wait for other people to broadcast the transactions, and then you only have to like do like a smaller branch. So the second situation is the ASP is trying to censor you, and they're like, oh, this guy only has $10. It's gonna cost him $50 to exit anyway, so we're just like not gonna talk with him anymore. And then you have the problem that you're alone having to go exit, and if you're alone, you need to pay all the fees for the whole tree branch. And that's kind of a big problem, because then you cannot receive $5 if it's going to cost you like $50 to get your $5, right? And the ASP can know that and say like, oh, he only has $5. Why would he even like, I can just do nothing. So that's the second situation where we think watchtowers can be very important. But using watchtowers in this situation is way less trivial, because with the expiry, it's very easy for the ASP to prove that they did the right thing. And then when they don't prove, you can assume they didn't do the right thing. But it's really hard to prove technically that someone is ignoring you. Like you can say, oh, I sent them this message, but then the other can say like, no, they didn't send me that message. So I never you see the difficulty. Like you cannot prove someone didn't react to your message, because it's hard for you to prove you actually send it. And they can say like, oh, but we did send them this response. And then you can say like, no, they didn't. And you cannot prove that. So we're thinking of ways to use watchtowers to overcome this. It's probably possible, but it's a little bit more tricky.
Is the ASP a counterparties to go on chain, or are they just a pure auditor?
They're a coordinator, yeah. So
You need a key from them to reconstruct the ASP. Like say like, okay, the ASP run away or got censored.
I don't need anything. You don't need anything, yeah.
The ASP fully replicate them. If every other counterparty is like, okay, you can be the DO ASP, then
well, no.
like all on chain.
You have to go all on chain.
They are a counterparty in everything in the element, sure.
They're not a counterparty, but the money that's in this one output that represents all these like people inside this tree, the only way to get that money is to use these like exits that are predefined, right? So if the ASP doesn't cooperate, the only way to do this is like this like exit strategy. The other ARCs have nothing to do with that and cannot really help you out. Like, yeah, we hope that being an ASP is like a profitable business model, so like ASPs won't disappear, right? But yeah, you never know.
The DNS have a thing, just get a double fake ASP and the whole network's gonna suggest to like unusable, right?
Yeah.
So you're big enough and it does like $1 billion in business a day, then it's really easy to get some shut.
But that's different than the ASP disappearing, right? Like if the ASP, if you shut it down, but the ASP puts on Twitter like, hey, we'll be back tomorrow, right? Then no one will like exit. They'll just wait for a day, and that sucks. But like, it's not gonna like fill the Bitcoin blockchain for like 2 years, right? So yeah, like you can attack the ASP, make it go down for a while, but if they have like paper backups of their keys, they can just come back online, right? It might take some time, but that doesn't, like, if you attack the ASP for a day, it doesn't mean everyone needs to go on chain. More questions?
And like if every round basically a block.
No, every round is a transaction. That's something interesting. So the initial idea of Burak was to have really fast rounds, because in this initial idea, the payments needed to happen in the round. So you had to wait for the round to finish for your payment to be successful. So he wanted like 5-second rounds. And if you make one Bitcoin transaction every 5 seconds, that's like a lot of Bitcoin transactions per block. And he would use something like between 2 and 4% of all block space just for the ARC, just per ARC. But then people came up with ideas where actually you don't need to wait for the round to make a transaction, and you can actually make a transaction like without needing to wait for the round. And then the receiver of the payment can actually wait for the next round to like cycle the money back into like his own ARC. So it changed a little bit the trust model, because then for like a short while, you have something like a state chain where it's like semi-custodial, but then the next like round, you just like make it non-custodial again. And in that case, you can have rounds that are like 1 minute, 10 minutes. So like that reduces the cost a lot, and does not have any usability like drawbacks.
So rounds are like a core. So the rounds are, I think, like any cores if you can to redo
yeah, maybe.
and the pseudo.
Maybe like anchors, I don't know. It's like Yeah, it's like you can make ARC payments not using the rounds, but they have a slightly different trust model. And then when you're like, okay, like I just received this like $1 for this like cup of coffee, and then like the next round I'm just gonna like take this money out of this like semi-custodial trust model back into the non-custodial trust model. And this is better, like because like we saw for privacy, your anonymity set is the whole rounds. So if the round is 10 minutes, you will have like way more people, way more anonymity than if the round is 5 seconds. It might be only like 100 transactions or something, and then it might be like slightly easier to mess with that. More questions? Yeah.
Is there a hint of the $7 that you set out or something like that? Or are you still working for us?
What do you mean standards that need to be set?
Also, these light bulbs for like stop VIP.
Okay, yeah. I think our Burak started to write boats. Like we use the like the nomenclature of the like boats. We have like onboarding the ARC and stuff. No, like the specifics of the protocol are not really set in stone because there's still too much variety. I know some people are working on a proof of concept version on Liquid because Liquid has covenants. I didn't talk about this. Initially, well, still, so the ideal version of ARC would use a primitive in Bitcoin technology that doesn't exist yet or that is not like activated yet, but has been talked about a lot. It's called covenants. And it's like a more complex way to like secure your coins without using keys or signatures. And so many people want covenants, but many people don't agree on the way to introduce covenants into Bitcoin. So it's more like a technical fight than like a real like ideological fight. Even many people also try to make it more ideological. I believe at some point we'll have covenants, but there's a version of ARC that can work without this new thing. And initially people thought this had like a really bad drawback because it introduced a lot of interactivity. And people thought in this model, initially you couldn't receive, like you would have to be aligned to receive money on ARC. And that's kind of really annoying because you kind of like want to be able to send money to people like donations without them having to be aligned. But with the current design that we have, you don't really need it. So I personally believe like we can easily have an ARC implementation that doesn't require covenants, but still gives you most of the like user UX benefits of ARC. So right now, some people are working on a version of ARC using the covenants that are in Liquid. And I believe soon people will start working on another version of ARC that will be able to activate on mainnet and will not use covenants. Other questions?
I don't really get how the trust is anchored onto the Bitcoin blockchain without any block confirmations. Like, so every round should be like shorter than 10 rounds, right?
That's a very good question. Yeah, you would have the double spend problem. And actually, I have a slide about the double spend problem. But yeah, so that's true. If you have really fast rounds in like a 5-second round scenario where every transaction would be like happening inside a round, then technically the ASP could double spend your round. But there's two things you can mention there. One is the ASP doesn't inherently gain anything from doing that. It actually loses because it loses reputation as being an unreliable ASP, but it doesn't like get any of your money because the way ARC works is that if it would double spend, like it wouldn't gain because when you spend your VTXO and you get a new one, like if you double spend, you obviously don't get your new one because that one doesn't confirm, but you also don't lose your old one. So like you're actually then canceling all the transactions and the ASP doesn't gain anything, right? So the ASP can only gain from this if it's actually actively trying to double spend you. Like if it actually like Kelvin said, if it's actually sending someone ARC Bitcoin, receiving gold, and then undoing the transaction and keeping the gold, right? Or if it like participate with someone doing an attack like this. So there's no inherent incentive for the ASP to cancel transactions. And then the second thing you can talk about here is that when you do a Lightning payment over ARC, actually the ASP has an incentive to confirm the transaction because how Lightning over ARC works is you actually send some money to the ASP and then he immediately sends his money over Lightning to someone else. So if then the ASP would cancel this transaction, it would actually lose money, right? So like if a non-negligible number of people are doing Lightning payments in an ARC round, then there's actually a strong incentive for the ASP to confirm that round and not double spend it, because otherwise it will lost have all that money that people have spent over Lightning. So the double spend problem isn't really a problem. But also since rounds will be longer, and since we now have ways to make ARC transactions outside of the rounds, it's not really so much of a problem anymore. So like if you really want full confirmation, you'll just wait for the transaction to confirm. But when you want to make time-sensitive payments, like retail payments, you would not wait for the round anyway. So you would do some other mechanism, either Lightning or like this fast, we call them like shortcut payments. And then the receiver would just like in the background wait for the next round to cycle their coins. And if the round is 1 minute or 10 minutes and they need to wait for confirmation and it's 10 or 20 minutes, it's not different. But like paying at a shop, you obviously don't want to wait 20 minutes. More questions? Yeah.
So sounds to me, arguments were confident lightly, but what about your later systems like big credit, buttons?
Well, I didn't fully understand your question, but you were like, what about other like layer 2s like Liquid and Fetty and stuff?
I'm very
Yeah. So, first of all, like some people are very sensitive to the word layer 2. So like I can give some background. Like some people, and I think I agree mostly with those people, say like if a layer 2 protocol on Bitcoin is something that doesn't like break with the trust model of Bitcoin, right? So it's only a full layer 2 if you can use it trustlessly. So like in that case, Fedimint and Liquid, which are like semi-custodial situations, are not really layer 2s because you give your money to someone else, they then allow you to spend it, but if you want your money back, you need to ask them, right? So Lightning and ARC, you can always get your money back. Even if everyone says like, no, you can still get your money back. So how it compares with Liquid and Fedimint and those kind of projects is that it's a full layer 2. It's a trusted layer 2. And I think it's mostly complementary. Liquid, it's a sidechain, right? So Liquid counts for all sidechains. They're like very orthogonal. Sidechains will do their own thing. You can build ARCs on sidechains just so you can build Lightning on sidechains. They can be interoperable. So I don't really see like any like comparison. As for Fedimint is basically like a community coming together and hosting like a sort of like private custodial servers. So basically one family, instead of each having their own Bitcoin wallet, they can like have one group of people that are more technical, like run a wallet for the whole family or for the whole community, for a whole village, for a whole company. And this was mostly like interesting because Lightning is so difficult. Like I said, you need to have your channels. And then if like only this group of people can manage the channels and then like hundreds of people can like come together and use this Lightning, it helps. And just like with Lightning, ARC could just be complementary. Like these people that run the Fedimint can just also participate in ARC, and then you as a user just interface with them to send on ARC so that they can like cycle the VTXOs every 2 weeks and you don't have to care about that. So I think it's mostly complementary, just like Lightning. More questions? Yeah.
Already incentivize the SP.
The
That was a common reason for expanding.
The common reason for someone to be in ASP, you ask, right? Yeah, money. Like you charge a fee, right? You charge a fee. So, huh?
So like stand up that wall to decide.
That's something that we don't really like model a lot, but we imagine that they would just charge a small fee per transaction, either flat or percentage based. Like, what's the incentive to be Visa, right? Like, you charge a fee. The only difference here is that it's an open protocol. Anyone can be an ASP. Like, you don't create monopolies. So, like I said, there needs to be a certain, like, there's a cost for the ASP to run the ASP. So the on-chain cost and the liquidity cost. So obviously there needs to be a fee to cover these costs, and then the ASP can just mark up a little bit extra on top of that to make money. I think that's mostly the model that they will use. Like it's the same with LSPs, right? Currently LSPs have very different models. Like some of them charge a flat fee, some of them charge a percentage-based fee, some of them charge flat plus percentage. Like, yeah, this will be very flexible. Yeah?
Do you think in the future all LSPs will be also ASPs instead?
No, because being an LSP compared to being an ASP is very cheap. Like if you have a few channels, you can be an LSP, but for ARC, you have this recurrent cost. like all the time, right? You always need to make transactions using the round. Like, well, it was way worse when we thought about 5-second rounds than when we think about like 10-minute rounds. You could, in theory, run an arc and have 1-hour rounds, and it would be fairly cheap. But it doesn't make sense to run an arc for your family with only like 20 users that only make like a few transactions per week, because then you're just like making on-chain transactions more than you would actually make normal transactions. So like an LSP, well, you're right that an LSP also like bundles a lot. I still think there will be less ASPs and there would be LSPs. Like an LSP has a fixed setup cost. You create a bunch of channels, and from then on, you kind of like manage them a little bit. Sometimes you might have to create one, close one, reopen one, but like your baseline fee is fairly flat. While with Arc, you have like a constant recurrent fee that you have to keep paying to run the Arc. So because of that, I think there will be less ASPs than LSPs.
Dark LSP settings to dip out.
Yeah. Yeah, like people talk about liquidity a lot because the liquidity requirements of Arc are subtle and not trivial to understand. But I think from the bigger picture, there's way less liquidity requirement than in Lightning. Like we saw in the Lightning slides, you have all these channels and there's a bunch of money in these channels. And if no one's making any payments, this money is just sitting there with absolutely no revenue coming from that money, right? So Lightning is very liquidity intensive because even when people don't make payments, you need to have liquidity just in case when they might make payments, right? And with Arc, it's different. Like the liquidity from Arc comes from the payments. If no one makes payments, there's no liquidity requirement. So that means that you can actually very explicitly charge the user for the liquidity, right? Like in Lightning, I put my liquidity as a liquidity provider. I put my liquidity up front. And I don't really know how long the money is going to be there and how many transactions I'm going to make. So it's hard to know how much do I have to charge the users to recover the cost of not using this money in another way. While with Arc, you know exactly like, okay, right now I'm going to have to lock up this money for 2 weeks. It's going to be this amount of money. And I can actually charge the user who wants to do this, whatever I want. So then I can say, okay, this is my cost for liquidity. So it's way easier to manage the liquidity. And I think in the end, we will need way less liquidity. Because liquidity is not stale. It's not like just waiting there, right? Other questions? Well, thank you very much.